Hello, everyone, and welcome to Speak and Feel English, the podcast where we explore ideas that challenge our everyday habits and help us grow into more mindful and self-aware individuals. I am Mia.
And I'm Ethan. Today's conversation is something that almost sounds simple on the surface, but when you really think about it, it becomes surprisingly deep and even a little uncomfortable. We are talking about spending an entire day without a phone.
Yes, just hearing that makes some people anxious. In a world where our phones have become extensions of ourselves, the idea of disconnecting, even for a single day, feels almost impossible. But that is exactly why we are discussing it today.
Absolutely. If we look around, nearly every aspect of our daily routine is tied to our phones. From the moment we wake up, many of us reach for our devices to check messages, notifications, or social media updates. It has become a reflex rather than a conscious decision.
And it does not stop there. We use our phones for navigation, communication, entertainment, work, reminders, shopping, and even relaxation. It is almost as if we have outsourced a significant portion of our thinking and living to this small device.
That is a powerful way to put it. And while technology has undoubtedly made life more convenient, it has also created a dependency that we rarely question. So today, we want to explore what happens when we intentionally step away from it.
Let us imagine a scenario. You wake up in the morning, but instead of reaching for your phone, you simply sit in silence for a few moments. There are no notifications, no emails, no instant updates about what others are doing, just you and your thoughts.
That already feels unfamiliar, does it not? For many people, silence has become uncomfortable because we are so used to constant stimulation. Our phones fill every gap in our day, whether we are waiting in line, commuting, or even taking a break.
Exactly. And that constant stimulation might be preventing us from experiencing something important, which is genuine presence. When we are always connected digitally, we may actually become disconnected from our immediate surroundings and even from ourselves.
So the idea of a day without a phone is not just about avoiding a device. It's about reclaiming attention, awareness, and control over how we spend our time. It's about asking ourselves a simple but profound question. What do we do when we are not being distracted?
That question can reveal a lot. Some people might feel bored, others might feel restless, and some might even feel anxious. But these reactions are important because they show us how deeply we rely on external stimulation.
Let's also consider the emotional aspect. Many people use their phones as a way to escape from stress, loneliness, or uncomfortable thoughts. Without that escape, they are forced to confront what is happening internally.
And while that may sound challenging, it can also be incredibly beneficial. When we allow ourselves to sit with our thoughts, we gain clarity. We start to understand what truly matters to us and what we might be avoiding.
Another interesting angle is how a phone-free day can impact our productivity. People often believe that being constantly connected makes them more efficient, but in reality, frequent interruptions can reduce focus and slow down deep work.
That's true. When we remove distractions, we create space for concentration. Tasks that usually take hours might be completed more quickly and with better quality because our attention is not being divided.
And then there's the social dimension. Ironically, even though phones connect us to people far away, they sometimes disconnect us from the people right in front of us. A day without a phone could encourage more meaningful face-to-face interactions.
Imagine having a conversation where neither person is checking their phone, where eye contact is maintained, and where both individuals are fully present. That kind of interaction feels rare today, but it's incredibly powerful.
It really is. And beyond conversations, even simple experiences like walking, eating, or observing nature can become richer when we are not constantly distracted.
We imagined waking up without reaching for a phone, and already that felt unusual. Now let us go a step further and talk about what actually happens during those first few hours of a phone-free day.
Yes, because that is where the real challenge begins. The initial phase is often filled with discomfort. People may feel an urge to check their phone almost automatically, even when there's no real reason to do so.
That urge is fascinating because it reveals how deeply ingrained the habit has become. It's not always about needing information or communication. Sometimes it's simply about habit and conditioning.
Exactly. Over time, our brains start associating small moments of inactivity with the need to check our phones. Waiting for something, feeling slightly bored, or even experiencing a brief pause in conversation can trigger that impulse.
And when that impulse is not satisfied, people may experience something similar to withdrawal. It might not be physical in the traditional sense, but psychologically it can feel quite intense.
There's often a sense of restlessness. Some people describe it as feeling like they are missing out on something important, even when they aren't sure what that something is.
That feeling is commonly referred to as the fear of missing out, and it plays a significant role in our attachment to phones. We're constantly connected to updates, messages, and information, so stepping away can feel like stepping out of the loop.
But what is interesting is that this discomfort does not last forever. If a person continues to resist the urge and stays committed to the phone-free day, something begins to shift.
Yes, after the initial resistance, there is often a transition. The mind starts to settle, and the constant urge to check the phone gradually weakens. It's almost as if the brain is recalibrating.
That's a great way to describe it. Without constant notifications and digital stimulation, the mind begins to slow down. Thoughts become less scattered, and there's a noticeable reduction in mental noise.
This is where awareness starts to increase. People begin to notice things they usually overlook, such as the sounds around them, the details in their environment, and even their own thought patterns.
It's almost like removing a layer of distraction that we didn't even realize was there. And once that layer is gone, the clarity that emerges can be quite surprising.
Another important aspect is how people deal with time during this phase. Without a phone to fill every gap, time may initially feel slower. Minutes can feel longer, and there's a sense of having more space in the day.
That can feel uncomfortable at first, especially for those who are used to constant engagement. But over time, that extra space can become an opportunity rather than a problem.
Exactly. It creates room for reflection, creativity, and intentional action. Instead of reacting to notifications or scrolling through content, people can choose how they want to spend their time.
Let's also talk about productivity during these early hours. Interestingly, some people find it difficult to focus at first because they are so used to switching between tasks and checking their phones.
That's true. The habit of multitasking can make it challenging to engage in deep work. But once the mind adjusts, focus tends to improve significantly.
And that improvement in focus can lead to a sense of accomplishment. Completing tasks without interruptions can feel more satisfying and less stressful.
There's also an emotional component to this phase. Without the constant input from social media and messages, people may become more aware of their own emotions.
That awareness can be both positive and challenging. On one hand, it allows for deeper understanding and emotional clarity. On the other hand, it may bring up feelings that people usually avoid by distracting themselves.
But facing those feelings is an important part of personal growth. When we stop avoiding discomfort, we create an opportunity to process and understand it.
Another interesting observation is how people start to reconnect with simple activities. Things like reading a book, taking a walk, or even sitting quietly can begin to feel more engaging.
Yes, because attention is no longer divided. When you're fully present, even ordinary experiences can become more meaningful. The initial discomfort has started to fade, and the mind is no longer constantly searching for stimulation. This is where a new kind of experience begins to unfold.
Yes, and one of the most noticeable changes at this stage is an increase in creativity. When the brain is not overloaded with continuous input, it finally gets the space it needs to think more freely and deeply.
That is such an important point. Our phones constantly feed us information, whether it is news, videos, or social updates. While that can be useful, it also leaves very little room for original thought.
Exactly. Creativity often emerges from moments of stillness and even boredom. When there's nothing external demanding our attention, the mind starts to wander, and that wandering can lead to new ideas and insights.
It's almost like giving your brain permission to breathe. Instead of reacting to content, you begin to create your own thoughts. People might find themselves reflecting on their goals, solving problems, or even coming up with ideas they had not considered before.
And this does not only apply to traditionally creative fields. Even in everyday life, this kind of thinking can improve decision making and bring clarity to situations that previously felt confusing.
Another powerful shift during this phase is the sense of presence. Without a phone, there's nothing pulling your attention away from the current moment. You begin to fully engage with whatever you are doing.
That is true. Whether it's having a meal, walking outside, or working on a task, the experience becomes more immersive. You notice details, textures, and emotions that might otherwise go unnoticed.
For example, imagine sitting down for a meal without any distractions. Instead of scrolling through your phone, you focus on the taste, the smell, and the experience of eating. It may sound simple, but it can be incredibly grounding.
And this level of presence extends to interactions with other people as well. Conversations become more meaningful when both individuals are fully engaged.
Yes, and this is where the impact on relationships becomes very clear. When you're not checking your phone during a conversation, you are sending a strong message that the other person has your full attention.
That kind of attention is rare, and it can strengthen connections in a significant way. People feel heard, valued, and understood when they are not competing with a device for your focus.
It also changes the quality of communication. Instead of quick, fragmented exchanges, conversations become deeper and more thoughtful. There is more listening, more reflection, and more genuine engagement.
And let us not forget about self-connection. Without constant distractions, people often become more aware of their own thoughts, feelings, and desires.
That awareness can lead to important realizations. For example, someone might recognize patterns in their behavior, identify what truly matters to them, or gain clarity about decisions they have been avoiding.
It's interesting how stepping away from the outside world can actually bring us closer to ourselves. In a way, a phone-free day becomes a form of mental reset.
There's also a noticeable improvement in mental well-being. Without exposure to constant comparisons, notifications, and information overload, the mind feels lighter and less overwhelmed.
That reduction in mental clutter can lead to a sense of calm and balance. People may feel less anxious and more in control of their thoughts.
And this calmness is not just temporary, it can have a lasting effect, especially if someone begins to incorporate small periods of disconnection into their daily routine.
Another aspect worth discussing is how people start to rediscover activities they may have neglected. Reading, writing, exercising, or simply spending time outdoors can become more appealing.
Yes, because these activities are no longer competing with the constant pull of digital content. They become opportunities rather than obligations.
It's almost like reconnecting with a simpler way of living, where time is not fragmented by endless notifications and distractions.
And that simplicity can be incredibly refreshing. It reminds us that we don't always need constant stimulation to feel engaged or fulfilled.
So, at this stage of the phone-free day, we see a transformation. What started as discomfort has now evolved into creativity, presence, and deeper connections with both others and oneself.
As the day continues and we move closer to the evening, the experience of being without a phone begins to take on a different quality. It is no longer about resisting the urge or adjusting to the absence. It becomes more about reflection and realization.
That is a crucial turning point. By this stage, most of the initial discomfort has disappeared, and people often find themselves in a calmer, more stable mental state. This creates the perfect environment for deeper thinking.
Yes, and with that clarity, individuals start to evaluate their relationship with their phones more honestly. They begin to notice patterns that they might not have been aware of before.
For instance, many people realize how often they check their phones without any real purpose. It becomes clear that a significant portion of their usage is driven by habit rather than necessity.
And that realization can be quite eye-opening. When you see how much time is spent on automatic behaviors, it naturally leads to the question of whether that time could be used more intentionally.
Another important realization is the difference in mental state. After spending most of the day without constant notifications and digital interruptions, people often feel more relaxed and less mentally exhausted.
That contrast is powerful. It highlights how much of our daily stress may be linked to the constant flow of information and the pressure to stay connected at all times.
It also brings attention to the concept of control. Many people assume they are in control of their phone usage, but a day without it can reveal that the opposite is sometimes true.
Exactly. When you feel the urge to check your phone and realize how automatic it is, it raises an important question. Are we using our phones or are our phones using us?
That question can change the way people think about technology. Instead of seeing it as something neutral, they begin to recognize its influence on their behavior, attention, and even emotions.
There's also a shift in how people perceive time. Without constant interruptions, the day often feels longer and more fulfilling. Activities are completed with greater focus, and there is a stronger sense of accomplishment.
That is true. It's not that there is more time, but rather that time is experienced differently. When attention is not fragmented, each moment feels more substantial.
Another realization comes from observing how relationships are affected. People may notice that their interactions throughout the day felt more genuine and meaningful.
Yes, and that can lead to a deeper appreciation for undivided attention. It becomes clear that being fully present is one of the most valuable things we can offer to others.
This often inspires people to rethink their habits during social interactions. For example, they may decide to keep their phone away during meals or conversations in the future.
And these small changes can have a significant impact over time. They help create stronger connections and more memorable experiences.
There is also a personal aspect to these reflections. Without constant external input, people may gain insight into their priorities, goals, and values.
That is an important point. When the noise is removed, it becomes easier to focus on what truly matters. People might realize that certain activities or habits are not in alignment with their long-term goals.
And that awareness can lead to intentional change. It's not about completely eliminating phone usage, but about using it in a way that supports rather than distracts from what is important.
Another interesting realization is how little we actually miss during a single day without a phone. Despite the fear of missing out, most people find that nothing truly urgent or critical happens.
That can be very reassuring. It challenges the belief that we need to be constantly connected in order to stay informed or relevant.
It also encourages a healthier perspective on communication. Not every message requires an immediate response, and not every notification needs to be checked right away.
This shift in mindset can reduce stress and create a more balanced approach to technology. Instead of reacting instantly, people can respond more thoughtfully.
And as the day comes closer to an end, there's often a sense of accomplishment. Completing an entire day without a phone can feel surprisingly empowering.
Yes, it proves that we are capable of stepping away from our habits and regaining control over our attention. That realization alone can be incredibly motivating.
It also opens the door to future changes. People might start to consider setting boundaries, such as designated phone-free times or reducing unnecessary screen usage.
And those small steps can lead to long-term benefits, including improved focus, better mental health, and stronger relationships. As we come to the end of this conversation, it is important to bring everything together and focus on what this experience truly means for our daily lives. A day without a phone is not just an experiment. It is a powerful reminder of how we choose to live our lives.
Yes, and what makes this experience so impactful is not just the temporary disconnection, but the insights that come from it. Once you realize how your habits affect your focus, emotions, and relationships, it becomes difficult to ignore.
Exactly. The goal is not to completely eliminate phone usage because, in many ways, phones are essential tools. The real goal is to create a healthier and more intentional relationship with them.
And that begins with awareness. Simply noticing how often you reach for your phone and why you do it can be the first step toward change. Are you using it with purpose, or is it just a reaction to boredom or habit?
Once that awareness is established, small and practical changes can make a significant difference. For example, setting specific times during the day when you consciously stay away from your phone can help you regain control over your attention.
Another effective approach is creating phone-free zones. This could be during meals, before going to sleep, or during important conversations. These boundaries may seem simple, but they can transform the quality of your experiences.
Yes, especially when it comes to relationships. Giving someone your full attention, even for a short period, can strengthen your connection in ways that constant partial attention never can.
And let us not forget about personal well-being. Reducing screen time, even slightly, can lead to better focus, improved mental clarity, and a greater sense of calm.
There is also value in scheduling intentional breaks from technology. It does not have to be an entire day every time, but even a few hours without a phone can provide a similar sense of clarity and reset.
That's a great point. Consistency matters more than intensity. Small, regular moments of disconnection can have a lasting impact over time.
Another practical idea is to replace phone usage with meaningful activities. Instead of scrolling through content, you could read, write, exercise, or spend time outdoors. These activities not only engage your mind, but also contribute to personal growth.
And in doing so, you begin to shift from passive consumption to active living. Instead of constantly receiving information, you start creating experiences and memories.
There is also something important about learning to be comfortable with stillness. As we discussed earlier, many people use their phones to avoid silence or boredom. But those quiet moments can be incredibly valuable.
Yes, because that's where reflection happens. That's where ideas are formed and where you can truly understand yourself without external noise.
So, in a way, a phone-free day teaches us something deeper. It shows us that we don't always need constant stimulation to feel engaged or fulfilled. Sometimes less is actually more.
And perhaps one of the most powerful lessons is that we have a choice. We can decide how we use technology rather than allowing it to dictate how we spend our time.
That sense of control is empowering. It reminds us that our attention is valuable, and we should be intentional about where we direct it.
As we wrap up, I would encourage our listeners to try this experiment for themselves. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be extreme. Start small, observe your experience, and see what you discover.
You might be surprised by how much clarity, calm, and connection you can gain from something as simple as stepping away from your phone.
And even if you take away just one lesson from this conversation, let it be this. Your time and attention are among your most valuable resources. Use them wisely.
Thank you for joining us today and being a part of this thoughtful discussion.
For more meaningful conversations like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay connected with Speak and Feel English.
We look forward to having you with us again in the next episode.
Until then, take care, stay present, and keep growing.